This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening and welcome to everyone. I'm Cindy Folkers, Radiation and Health Hazard Specialist at Beyond Nuclear. I will be moderating tonight's event, Radioactive, the Women of 3 Mile Island, Gender, Environmental Justice, and the Future of Nuclear Power. First, some housekeeping. Chat is disabled for this webinar. If you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. I will briefly introduce each of our speakers. After they have all finished speaking, there will be a question and answer session. So without further ado, here is Dr. Heidi Hutner, our Director of Radioactive. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you so much. I am Heidi Hutner, and as Cindy just said, I'm the Director of Radioactive, the Women of 3 Mile Island. I want to welcome all of you to our session tonight. I'm really honored to be here. In particular, I want to acknowledge that this is the actual anniversary of the 3 Mile Island meltdown that took place 45 years ago. Typically, if the plant were still open, the mothers would be at the plant at the hour of the meltdown began, approximately 4 a.m. And that's where I began this journey. And I met them outside at a vigil for the 39th anniversary where we began filming. And it was a remarkable moment. I could feel it as it was happening. And they're just beautiful women, and they became the protagonists of our film. And they're really the reason we made this film. At the time, I was seeking to film a number of different nuclear disaster sites. But once you meet Beth, Paula, Joyce, and Linda, it's pretty hard to go anywhere but to their kitchens and their homes. We can see them right now. It says Beth Drosba, but that's Beth and Joyce in Joyce's kitchen, where a lot of our film was shot in that kitchen. Many hours in there around the kitchen table. I want for just 1 minute for all of us to take a moment of silence in memory of what happened at 3 Mile Island. Okay, I don't think there's really any way to capture what it would have been like to be living there in that time. From the many stories I've heard, it was pretty much a nightmare, particularly for parents. I can't fathom being a parent and being told I have to evacuate, and especially if I was pregnant or I had children younger, but I think it doesn't matter what age you are, whether you have parents or you're a parent or you're not a parent, it was utterly frightening. And the messages were completely conflicting. Nobody knew what to do. It was disorganized. People were not told the truth. They weren't even told there was a meltdown taking place on that first day when the company knew this. People knew this and were not warning the community. So it's a pretty amazing story. If you've seen the film, if you haven't, I recommend that you do. It was truly an honor to be told this story, to live this story again with the four mothers and many other people in the community, through Joanne, through physicians we met, Joanne Doroshow, who was the attorney who worked on the restart case, which I'm sure she'll talk about a little bit tonight. And just a remarkable place with really kind, sweet, giving people, and so not right that this happened to them. It's not right for anyone anywhere in the world for this to happen. I also just want to acknowledge that there are many disaster sites around the US and globally. So many of them have been covered up. So many of them are not cleaned up. So many people remain suffering, and it's, they're told they're crazy, they're radiophobic, they're making it up, and it's not dangerous. Over and over, we hear that radiation won't harm you. Legally, people really have great difficulty protecting themselves. Every community I go to has a story very similar to this one, or worse. Or worse. You're going to hear tonight about what's happening and what has happened to the Navajo people, where much uranium mining took place, where it remains incredibly contaminated. And that's where all of our nuclear cycle begins. We need uranium for both nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So we'll hear about that. There's also a real gender issue if you watch the film. There's so many gender issues regarding this issue, but one big one Mary Olson will talk about is the disparity and the inequity in exposures to radiation. Girls are harmed the most of all, and that is not part of our regulation or our protections right now. There's no regard for that currently. We also know that women are incredible leaders of the movement. We have incredible female scientists, but all of this has been squashed and silenced historically. You're seeing some of these leaders right here on this screen. Isn't even time to tell you how extraordinary these women are. Everybody here does incredible work, including our moderator, but every single who won't be talking that much, but really heroes who selflessly give and continue to give. And it is not for ego. It is not for money. Believe me, it's for love of our earth, all living things, and our children and our future. I'm not going to say a whole lot more. I'm going to leave it to all the speakers. I think the film that I made in collaboration with many, many people speaks for itself. I hope if you haven't seen it, you will see it. It was made with incredible care and love and energy and time and devotion. Everybody on the screen participated pretty much. And the moms in particular gave and gave and gave and gave. And every time we thought we finished shooting, I'd have to call them back up and say, I'm so sorry, but we have to come back again. And this went on for 5 years. And I got to eat a lot of cake, a lot of delicious cakes and pancakes and muffins with them and meet their families. And they became my family. I like to say I lost my mother when I was younger, and I like to say I lost one mother, but I gained 4.
Yes, yes.
So we're here tonight. This is a relaxed evening. This is not an academic presentation. We're sharing with you and honoring all of the people who lived through the 3 Mile Island meltdown and who are still suffering, many of whom lots of cancers, lots of disease, lots of unanswered questions, not nearly enough studies, and not nearly enough help. So on that note, we'll move on to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Our next speaker is Joanne Doroshow, who is the founder and executive director of the Center for Justice and Democracy at New York Law School, the only national consumer rights organization dedicated exclusively to protecting the civil justice system. Her legal career began as lead counsel and spokesperson for 3 Mile Island Alert, a community group working to block the restart of the TMI-1 nuclear reactor after the 1979 3 Mile Island accident. Welcome, Joanne.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thank you for having me. As Heidi mentioned, as Cindy mentioned, and if you've seen the film Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island, you've probably seen some of my story. I won't go into it in too much detail, but as a very young lawyer, I and a waitress by the name of Louise Bradford ended up taking over the case that the NRC had set up after the TMI accident to examine whether or not the sister plant, the undamaged reactor, TMI Unit 1, should be allowed to restart, given what had just happened in that community. So there are many, many stories about what that process was like. What I'd like to just address briefly here tonight is some of the important things that we learned in that process and why I think they're still relevant today. The narrative that you've heard about this accident, even if you don't believe it, but you've certainly heard people talk about it this way, is that nobody died at TMI. Not that much radiation got out, even though half the core melted. There are some problems with the equipment. It was all the operator's fault. We'll fix a few things. We'll fix some processes and retrain all the operators, and everything will be fine, and we'll just move on. And if that's the story that you believe about TMI, that is, I am here to tell you, not the real story of Female Island. This was an accident that was caused because the company placed its own financial considerations above safety. It put this crippled plan into operation before it was ready. They were still going through the construction punch list when this plant went online. This plant should have been shut down for repairs. It wasn't, and it led to what became the worst and still is the worst commercial nuclear accident in U.S. history. So much fuel melted during this event that experts now believe that we were about 30 minutes from a full-blown catastrophe where radiation would have been spewed far, far and away through all over central Pennsylvania. It was very, very close, and we were very, very lucky. And it was sheer luck that it didn't turn into that type of catastrophe. But a large amount of fuel did melt. While this was going on, in the middle of this situation that was completely out of control, the fuel was seriously damaged and was melting, and they didn't know how to stabilize the reactor. They didn't know how to stop it. They were placing hundreds of thousands of people in danger. What did they do? They told nobody. During this accident, the company deliberately, intentionally, and knowingly lied about information in their possession about what was going on. They lied to public officials for 2 days. They told state officials, basically, who were responsible for protecting this area, that it was under control and that they needed to mind their own business. Then after this accident, rather than learning anything, this same company then went ahead and pressured operators to shut up about what they knew about it. Luckily, a few of them didn't shut up. That's how we learn anything. We're able to learn anything about this. But then within a year, management facilitated cheating on the operator retests that all the management and operators were supposed to take to requalify themselves. Major cheating scandal. They falsified reports about their own culpability, which was so egregious that the U.S. Justice Department began a criminal investigation of this. They hid reports that were critical of them. They intimidated and harassed cleanup workers who were concerned with and reporting safety violations during the TMI2 cleanup. And then they pled guilty and no contest to crimes. And what did the NRC say about this? They said, well, you know, if you're a company that's done all of that and you want your license back, no problem. Go ahead. Here you go. Here's your license. Despite the pleas from the governor, both senators from Pennsylvania, the congressional delegation from that area, the entire Pennsylvania Senate, state and local officials too numerous to count, referendums 2-1, 3-1 against restart, didn't matter. So what did we learn? We learned that a company licensed to operate a nuclear reactor can have a grave lack of integrity, that the NRC, that is supposed to protect the public and oversee this company, can not only overlook this wrongdoing, but they themselves can engage in wrongdoing on behalf of the company themselves. And that's according to the U.S. Justice Department's criminal investigations, also of the NRC staff. And we learned that the state is basically powerless to do anything about this. And that is because of the way the laws are written in this country that don't allow states and local governments to do anything to stop a license. And that's the way it was then. That's the way it is today, and nothing has changed. So with that bit of good news, I will turn things back to Cindy.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Our next speakers are the primary characters in Radioactive. They're concerned mothers and women who first organized after the meltdown. They came together in 1979 to uncover the truth, to stop the restart of Reactor 1, and to protect their children and community. Their fight continues to this day. These women include Beth Drasba, Paula Kinney, Linda Brash, and Joyce Karate. Only Beth and Joyce are able to join us tonight on screen. They will speak for the four. According to director Heidi Hutner, the four mothers are the center of this film, the heart of the community, as are the many women activists of the 3 Mile Island community, many of whom are not able to be with us tonight. These women formed a fierce and tenacious unit, and we commemorate and honor them.
Mhm.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Joyce, for being here tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good.
I guess basically I was raised in the coal regions of Pennsylvania, so in small towns where community is every bit a part of all of us. And when we moved to Middletown and got involved, the community was with us as well. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time of the accident. It did not take me long to realize that my children and my family as a whole were in deep jeopardy because of the lies of 3 Mile Island and its executive branches. I knew I had to speak. I was by nature a quiet person, but I knew I had to go forth. Somebody had to protect my kids because on that Wednesday and the Thursday, when they were radiating on my children and everyone else, I was taken, the control for me to protect my children was taken away from me. And I vowed at the day of their birth that I would protect them forever. So because of that, I found my voice with Paula and Joyce and Linda. Now, Paula and I were high school classmates from that small town. And with the four of us, we were determined to not get radical, but to get positive in trying to find the truth, that if our families got sick, we would know what to do and how to take care of them. I have to tell you, it is not easy to keep saying no in an environment where yes is acceptable when people lie and are incompetent at doing their jobs. It was difficult for us because a lot of the people that lived in Middletown worked at the plant, so we were perceived as the enemy. Our children were chastised in the school systems, and we had to not only protect them there, we had to keep protecting them to help them to understand that everything we did was because we loved them and we were going to take care of them. I think the most important thing for me is one time in Washington when I was testifying, I did say at the end of my speech that I honestly believe God gave man the beautiful gift to create mankind, but he gave women the power to endure for its continuity. And I believe that. I believe it wholeheartedly, and I think the four of us have been able to endure for 45 years to prove it to be true. Thank you.
Well, I, like Beth, have lived here in this community actually all of my life. And one of the reasons why the nuclear power plant was put here is because we came from a conservative, well-meaning community. Nobody was really going to argue with the government, who knew best for us that it was okay. And when the accident happened, I looked up what the NRC was, and its mandate was the health and safety of the people. And I thought, well, there's where we'll go and we'll find some answers. Unfortunately, we found nothing. And even worse than that is they betrayed what they were mandated to do. The interests of the people was never their concern: to procreate nuclear power, to ensure things ran smoothly on their end was all that they were interested in. They were not interested in hearing from us. The one thing the NRC learned from the accident was less people involvement in what their decisions were, of opening up the information to the community. That is the thing that they learned. We discovered that the most important thing was to really find the truth and to know that whatever we sought, we were going to get a truthful answer to, and we were never, ever going to let them get away with lying to us. The NRC lied to us, the company lied to us, and it was a lesson that we learned, that we were never, ever going to let them have the power over us, at least giving us the false information. We would fight back.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, Beth and Joyce.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Your stories are so important. Our next speaker is Mary Olson, the founder of Gender and Radiation Impact Project, which is dedicated to education about how radiation degrades human health and its disproportionate harm to girls and women. Olson founded Gender and Radiation Impact Project after 28 years of service to communities impacted by radioactive wastes when she was a staff biologist for Nuclear Information and Resource Service from 1991 to 2019. Mary, thank you so much for being here tonight and welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, everyone who's participating. It's an honor to be here 45 years later to hear mothers expressing their commitment to their children, which I know continues to this day, and to the truth. What more can we ask of ourselves and each other? I think it is truly the biggest testament to these events. And these events are worldwide, as Heidi said. Tonight, we're commemorating the meltdown of a nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania. And to this day, we really don't know how much radioactivity was released during that series of events. It wasn't just one event, it was a whole cascade of catastrophic releases. And why don't we know? Well, because they weren't prepared for it. They didn't have a methodology to capture the information. They didn't want to capture the information. And then afterwards, it was clearly one of the biggest cover-ups in the history of our nuclear industry here in the United States. Except for that, in the same year, another catastrophic release of radioactivity happened. And I'm sure Anna and others will tell us more. But I want to acknowledge that wow, in 1979, millions of gallons of radioactivity were spilled from a uranium mill tailing site, including some of the baddest actors in the inventory of natural radiation on this planet, radium, thorium, radon, and of course, the longest lasting, uranium, were the result of a break of a dam at that site. We also do not know exactly how much radioactivity was released. We also know it was not cleaned up, and we know it was catastrophic. But there wasn't really a cover-up of the Church Rock uranium catastrophe because nobody ever reported it, right? We never hear about it. We're ignorant, and we allow this ignorance to continue in part because radiation can't be seen, can't be smelled, can't be sensed. So what does it mean that there is no safe exposure of radiation? I'm going to start there with a quote from my friend, Dr. Helen Caldicott, who in 1979 wrote a book called Nuclear Madness that came into its first publication only months after the catastrophic events in Harrisburg with 3 Mile Island. In that book is a line that I quote often. It takes only a single cell and a single emission of radioactivity to have the potential for a fatal cancer. We know now that many of those cells repair themselves. And so not every exposure to radiation, going to the dentist, not all of those exposures result in cancer. However, it is noteworthy that both pregnancy and cancer start with a single cell. And there is no way to protect every cell in every child as much as every mother would want to do that. So I'm going to unwrap a little bit of this. You can find more information on the website genderandradiation.org, and the AND is AND, genderandradiation.org. So radiation from any source is more harmful to children than to adults. A child's body is smaller, and so the same amount of radiation causes a higher exposure. Even more important, their cells are dividing rapidly because they are growing, and radiation harms our cells. Even at very high levels, that is what is happening. Our cells are being damaged by radiation. Our DNA inside those cells is the instruction book for keeping our bodies healthy, to fight disease, to make our children. And when radiation hits DNA, either as a particle or a wave, it can break the strands or scramble the code. Cindy calls that, quoting others, that it's the madman in the library. It's a very apt image. So yes, we have repair mechanisms, but sometimes the repair is impossible or the repair is not complete and the cell does not die. It may linger. Some of these abnormal cells do nothing, but it takes the activation of only one of them to have the potential for cell division going out of control and becoming a cancer. This may happen in years or even decades after the radiation exposure, making it impossible to tell which exposure resulted in that outcome. Radiation can impact our reproductive cells, the embryo, the fetus. Radiation can end pregnancy at any stage or produce many different outcomes. If the harm is early in the pregnancy, it's possible the woman didn't even know she was pregnant. Overall, radiation is something that should be studied and really hasn't been enough in relation to infertility. Radiation exposure during pregnancy can result in childhood cancer and leukemia. The pioneering work done in the late 1950s by Dr. Alice Stewart was in the UK. You can find Alice Stewart's papers in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, and it's all online. Please note, her work is about the examination using X-rays of pregnant women. So physicians were doing this without even having determined whether radiation exposure was safe for either the mother or the fetus. Stewart found that babies born after a single X-ray exam, which were more potent at that time, but still were twice as likely to have childhood cancer, including leukemia, but other cancers as well, than those who were not X-rayed. And mothers who had more than one exam, which happened, had children with even higher risks. Our moderator, Cindy Folkers, has written extensively on girls, women, and pregnancy, and I commend to you her work as well. So it turns out that radiation can do many kinds of damage that results in many different outcomes. We now know that heart disease and cardiovascular problems like heart attack and stroke can be caused by radiation. Often the tissues are hardened by the exposures. So I want a time check because I had a timer that I was supposed to start and I didn't.
You have about 4 more minutes.
Thank you. I could reset it, but we'll just look at the clock. Okay, all good. So I was working in the field of radioactive waste policy and educating about radiation for about 20 years when a woman asked me, was radiation more harmful to her body than to a man? In other words, was biological sex a factor in the outcome of radiation exposure? This question had never come up in all of those 20 years. I was flummoxed. I didn't know what to say. From the podium, I told her I'd get back to her. But when I went home and searched online, I could find nothing. This was about 2009. Fast forward, 2011, I'd actually forgotten the question. It was so existentially discombobulating to me to even try to understand why we'd never asked or answered this question before. At least I had not. And there was the videotape of reactors exploding in Japan. And those reactors were made, well, they weren't made in the US, but they were designed in the US. And so naturally enough, in any big radiation situation, Nuclear Information and Resource Service wanted me to reach out and connect with people and help them about radiation. And I said I would, but first I had to answer that question. Is radiation more harmful to a woman? I'd been working with Rosalie Bertel. She was near the end of her life. And it was Rosalie who directed me to the National Academy of Science report called BEIR 7. That's its short name. And it's BEIR for Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation. And it's a series of reports. So this was report number 7 that came out in 2006. We're now in 2011. So the thing was 5 years old, and I honestly had only looked cursorily at its introduction and scanned for a few conclusions. And none of the conclusions mentioned the finding that's in the data in that report, which is yes, radiation is more harmful to the female body. And it's most harmful to young females, but it is more harmful than males in every age group that come across to us from the study of the survivors of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And this is where I have to take a brief moment before I then spell out those conclusions, and then I'll be done, to apologize, because I am participating in a crime against humanity when I use this data. And I wouldn't use the data except for that it's the only place where we have a data set that includes people who were exposed from infancy through all the different ages up to their 80s. And it is so incredibly still horrific to me that my government invented human-caused fission and then weaponized it and then used it in New Mexico, where people have not been adequately understood to have been harmed, and used it in testing all across the world, but chose the first weapons to be dropped on cities full of people. And I am so sorry for the survivors that I continue to bring these numbers forward, and yet they're so important. So what are they? In brief, this data set tells us that ionizing radiation is more harmful to children compared to adults. The youngest group had the most cancer across their lifespan, 60 years of counting cancers and counting cancer deaths in each age group, and then adjusting for all the demographic factors so that you're not comparing a long life to a short life. The rate of cancer amongst the youngest was highest. However, in this youngest group, for every boy who grew up over those 60 years and had a cancer, and males get cancer, there were 2 cancers in the females of the same age group, a doubling. And in biological research, that's a big deal. And we also have to point out that these cancers came across the 60 years. It was not all childhood cancer. So comparing females, every single age group across, from the infants to the 80-year-olds exposed in August of 1945 in these 2 cities and survived and now being studied, in every single age group, the females had more cancer. And in every single age group, the females have more cardiovascular impacts. And the difference is greatest, at least in the cancer group, when the exposure is to the young children. So the most harmed individuals are the girls. Now, in the United States, we still use a reference man to set our standards, to evaluate whether a license will perform well enough to be given. But many different reasons we use a reference individual. And in this case, in the United States, we use a reference man. Other parts of the world, they use a androgynous male, female, but still an adult. And the problem here is that that is a more resistant individual. So you compare that young adult male in the data set from Japan to the young boys, and he is 4 times more resistant to cancer than the young boys were. Now compare that young adult male, who is the reference individual, to the little girls. There's a 7 times greater incidence of cancer amongst the girls, and he is 7 times more resistant. So the answer is yes, biological sex is a factor in the outcome of radiation. And I'll end by saying that Cindy and I are working on trying to build a new model that will be centered on those who are most harmed. And so stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you so much for your work in this area as well. And it's frankly wonderful to be able to collaborate with you. Our next speaker is Anna Rondon. She is Diné and Project Director of the New Mexico Social Justice and Equity Institute. She is recognized for her long-standing commitment to social justice, particularly in relation to the health impacts of uranium mining on Indigenous communities. For over 50 years, she has been a prominent figure in movement building and organizing for change and justice, working in various leadership positions. Her work has deeply rooted her in the community and educated her on how to navigate the complex levels of organizing for systemic change. Anna, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm very privileged and honored to be able to be part of this panel tonight during this nuclear beast that we're all fighting the past well, now 80 years in terms of uranium mining in the Southwest. But my name's Anna, and I just also wanted to acknowledge that the river that you all live on too is a very beautiful river. Was Sakia, an Algonquin word for flowing river. And I was just doing research on the lands there and the community. And it seems that by watching the film that I already know you, and Beth, with your name called, when you said Drozba, my mom's name in Navajo was Ba. And it just reminded me of my mom, because what it means is war in our language. So for women, for us women, we in Navajo, we have like Zanapa, means woman of war. So I just feel connected because of that sound, connects us, and the beauty of your land there. And what also brings us together, I think, is the commonality of the United States government and their misguided science that is bought and sold in Wall Street, and the families that profit over the nuclear industry and nuclear weapons. You always have to have both. And they say they have to have nuclear weapons and nuclear energy because it's going to save us with climate change with nuclear energy, which is a lie. There's no way that nuclear energy, showing what happened to your community, is a safe way for energy. Knowing that the people in that was it the Tower 2, there was some kind of instrument that was supposed to be cleaning where the steam would flow, and it was clogged up. And I was reading the report, and it cited that the worker that was on site looking at the gauges, his belly was in the way and he couldn't see the right reading. What kind of company, what kind of nuclear regulatory commission allows these types of workers that are incompetent, and at the same time killing the workers and killing the families and the future generations to suffer from radioactive illnesses, knowingly? It's criminal. It's criminal. And I believe next year, 2025, I hope that your community and the people from Church Rock, the women and the children, the grandmas, that we could meet during National or International Women's Month to tell our stories. I loved what you said about women, Beth, because it's true. And that's indigenous thought that you have, that we are carriers of this life, and we have every right as a woman to protect and fight this war, the spiritual war, and also the patriarchy. We know the American dream for some of us have become nightmares with uranium mining, the 1979 uranium spill, when they knew there was a crack. And you can invite another speaker that was there, Larry King, a Navajo, worked in the uranium mine. Yes, somebody has to be responsible because of the lies, because of the deaths. Wouldn't it be interesting if we got all our death certificates displayed as evidence of a mass killing of United States of America citizens? Our tax dollars should not be going to the nuclear mafia. We're going to defend our land, and we also want more answers. A lot of our relatives, like yours, have already had damage done to their babies. Talk about a book, Killing Our Own. It's a very good analysis of what the United States government has been doing to the citizens, killing our own. The other thing I wanted to bring up too, and it might ring true to some of you that have veterans that served in the Gulf War, March 5th, 1991. The first depleted uranium war was waged against the Iraqi people, indigenous peoples. It was an experiment. And those Navajo veterans from that war, we have studies and complaints by these veterans that came back that they impregnated their wife. And the baby only lasts 3 months. But the baby was like a jellyfish. It wasn't reported. Just this group of veterans, Gulf War veterans. So what we find is that a commonality of burning semen syndrome. There again, another war crime. What do? I know one thing that we need to do is demand reparations and frame this crime against humanity for what it is. But we need more people like you having these films that brings us together. The art, the tears, the pain we share. As women, I think we will be able to come together in a spiritual way. And I hope we can go to that river by 3 Mile Island. And do a prayer offering. And ask for forgiveness to the river, to the land, and to the people. I hope you all can help us to stop uranium mining. They're trying to do uranium mining at Grand Canyon. There's about 700 Havasupai that live in the Grand Canyon. It would mean so much to women of 3 Mile Island if we could have a statement from you and to the Navajo people, and that we heal together with truth to light and tell this government, especially during election time, no more. no more. Yeah, thank you so much.
Anna, you say that you are honored to be on our panel, but I have to say that we are honored to have you on our panel to close that circle from the uranium mining to the nuclear power reactors to whatever the waste is going to do and wherever it's going to go. We need to understand the full ramifications of the entire nuclear power fuel cycle and operations. And the community that you come from, it's so important. It is so important to have your voice. So thank you so much for being here. Our next speaker is Krystal Curley. She is a member of the Navajo Nation and the executive director of Indigenous Lifeways, a New Mexico-based nonprofit dedicated to restoring the health and balance for all people and our environment by utilizing traditional knowledge and wisdom, respectful land-based practices, ceremonies, and a deep understanding of the dynamics and peoples of our communities. Krystal, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Krystal Curley. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Indigenous Lifeways. I'm Diné. My mom is Anna Rondon, and I had to take a breather, so I'm thankful that you were able to do my introduction. I was just like breathing. I'm like, okay, I'm next. My mom, I grew up in the movement. Both my parents were in the American Indian movement. And so that's how I grew up, was just going through to different meetings. When I watched the film, it was so cool to know that the kids were involved going to the meetings, because that's how I grew up. And that's how I learned the tactics of how to keep the movement going, was from my mother. So the film for me I highly recommend it. I was taking notes while I was watching the film, because I learned so much. So many, even just like the women of 3 Mile Island, there's so many tactics and so many strategies that are embedded in that film that I learned so much from. And so many things that you did were the things that I grew up doing, just like I said, going to Mother Earth gatherings, going to different sites with my mom. I was like, oh, Mom, you really exposed me to all these radioactive places. And I was just like, but that's the sacrifice, and that's part of the movement. Even people that come here to New Mexico, I tell them, I'm like, be careful, because there's still radioactive dust out here. So you're still exposing yourself and holding it down in your homelands. There's still a risk. So that's how I grew up. And I have 3 daughters. My oldest is going to be 13. I have a daughter, she's 11, and my youngest, she's 7. And my love for filmmaking started when I was really young, very young, listening to my grandmother's stories. And that love for filmmaking the love for storytelling never ended. So I have my degree in filmmaking, in film production, and an emphasis in producing. So that passion for storytelling and ensuring our Indigenous narrative is intact is so important. About 80% of the US has no idea, have little to no education about Indigenous peoples. So, and then you see it with the media, you don't really get to see our narrative as much. It's only within the past, within my generation, past 30 years, where we're able to see a lot of Indigenous made, produced films. So, watching films and listening to stories, it has an impact on you, like a chemical reaction that happens when you listen to these stories. And yeah, the Women of 3 Mile Island film is incredible, just so powerful. So to be in the circle today, I could feel it even through this screen. I feel like I'm right there with you in your kitchen. So my mother, over 30 years ago, started a movement called the Southwest Indigenous Uranium Forum. And from that, back in about 10 years ago in 2014, we were able to formalize as a family, meet my mom, my brother, and I to create Indigenous Lifeways. My mom is the founding director, and when I graduated from film school in 2016, I was handed over the torch to be the director. So for the past 8 years, I've been the director, and we have expanded our narrative. Our foundation is really exposing the environmental racism that we experience in our county, in McKinley County. And that's where Church Rock is. And in our county, there's about 80,000 people, about 79,000 people that live in our county. And about 79% of those people are Indigenous. And there's about over 140 years of extraction history in our county alone. And the community that I'm born and raised in Gallup, it's about 5 miles outside of Church Rock where this spill happened. So the narrative that I grew up was that the spill came through Rio Perco, and then you can see some of the sludge that came through Gallup, through the Rio Perco. It goes right through Gallup, right through the highways and the railroad. And from what I was told is that after the spill happened, that some of the sand from the Rio Perco was used in some of the playgrounds and some of the places here, the places that I grew up in. But still to this day, as I start doing my work as a director and doing programming in my community in Gallup, there's still times where I meet people and they young women, young people that have no idea what uranium even is, even in the community that I'm from in Gallup. So the community education, the education that I received growing up around uranium, I feel was a privilege because of my mother. And I thought everyone grew up the way that I did, like going to gatherings, going to Los Alamos test site and holding it down. I was like 8 years old, going to these demonstrations. And I thought that's how everyone grew up. But in my community, we, the families and how the dynamics are is we don't really talk a lot about sex or the environment or disasters. These are things that these industries, what our family's perspectives, some families' perspectives are, is that, they help, sustain our family's income. It's an income to get food and the necessities for life. So there's not a lot of jobs where I'm from. And so that's one of the main sources of income is the fossil fuel industry. So we have, when we first started, it was coal, then uranium, we have oil and gas, we have fracking. And our most recent fight is hydrogen. And hydrogen development, and it all comes in different colors. Right now, the proposed hydrogen is green and blue hydrogen, which uses different techniques that use natural gas. So one of the other colors is pink hydrogen, which uses nuclear energy to fuel the hydrogen extraction using the water electrolysis. So these are new methods that they're combining different types of fossil fuel techniques and repackaging it. And, you know, it's like, again, with the propaganda, the greenwashing, the lies that they're feeding to communities, and that's being funded by Department of Energy, and other programs, federal funded programs. So with our organization, and my passion for filmmaking, you know, we have developed like the social justice multimedia toolkit. We have a reproductive justice and healing track where we prioritize healing and traditional knowledge. And well, what else did I miss? But I really want to bring it back home to the women. You know, the women in this circle right here, the mothers, the life givers, you know, people who are able to get pregnant. We have a really close relationship to water. We are also, as people, as celestial beings, are made up of water. We are born out of water. And so, you know, that relationship and connection to the earth and our surroundings is, it's like this. We have a very, very close relationship. And through colonization and patriarchy, that has been severed, and that knowledge, our traditional knowledge from around the world, has been taken away from us. So I feel as women, we are the threat to this patriarchal colonial society, to this fossil fuel death machine, that we are a threat to that agenda, just our pure existence. And so I just want to commend and, you know, honor all the women in this circle, the grandmothers before us, that have suffered the hands of patriarchy. And I just want to honor, you know, we are in very sacred times as well. We are in between eclipses, in between a full moon and a new moon. So with that, as celestial beings, you know, I want to honor all of our sacred sites from all over the world, from Stonehenge to Chaco to Egypt to Mexico, to all the temples, to all sacred sites, to the waterways. You know, to everybody. Hajono Shadoleth and
Thank you, Krystal. Thank you so much for being here. It means an awful lot to everyone here. To know just how full our circle of what I'm going to call warrior women is. We have very specific ways of dealing with this issue. We each take a piece of it, and it's refracted back, and we are having a movement. And I feel that tonight, in addition to everything that we've done up to this point, that we will be moving forward with greater strength. Our next speaker is Mark Jacobson. He is a professor of civil and environmental engineering and director of the Atmosphere Energy Program at Stanford University. His research focuses on understanding air pollution, climate problems, and developing healthy, safe, and sustainable solutions to these problems. As part of his work, he evaluates proposed technological solutions such as nuclear. Mark, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. These are very hard talks to follow because they're very sentimental and deep. And I'm going to talk more about numbers in a larger scale. First, I want to thank Heidi not only for producing such a wonderful film, but also for asking me to speak to you all. So I look at energy solutions to global warming, air pollution, and energy security. And I do evaluate all technologies, including nuclear, in determining whether they're useful or not. And I determined back in 2008 that nuclear was not such a good solution for addressing future climate and air pollution and energy security problems, for a variety of reasons. In fact, there are 7 reasons that I want to discuss. And I will say that, yeah, new nuclear, definitely we should not be promoting at all, whether they're large reactors or small reactors. And existing nuclear, we should not be subsidizing, which is the kind of becoming the norm, to keep open. These plants are old and dangerous, and they are expensive to stay open, and they're really, the money that's going into them is really preventing a faster transition to a real sustainable, clean, renewable, safe energy future. So let me just go through kind of quickly the different reasons why new nuclear and existing nuclear are not good. Well, first, new nuclear, I mean, there are 2 kind of economic and cost reasons, and then there are like 5 what I call energy security reasons. I mean, first, just if you ignore all the side effects of nuclear, just looking on how much it costs and how long it takes from planning to operation. Now, worldwide, there's never been a nuclear reactor that's taken less than 10 years from planning to operation. And it's the sky's the limit until in terms of what the longest time is. But most recently, the longest time is a plant in Finland. It took 22 years from planning to operation. In North America and Europe, it's 17 to 21 years between planning and operation. There was only 2 reactors built in the last decade in the United States, the Vogtle reactors, and they just came online, and it took them almost 18 years between planning and operation. And they laid enough concrete during that time, during the construction period of that time, for a sidewalk between Miami and Seattle. So they put a huge amount of carbon into the air before a single kilowatt hour of electricity was generated, in addition to all the other emissions associated with building a nuclear plant. But by spending, and how much did that cost? That cost $35 billion, which translates to about almost $16 a watt, compared with $1 a watt for new wind or solar. And if you look at the efficiency of nuclear versus wind or solar, it's still about 7 to 8 times the energy cost over the lifetime of the nuclear plant. So, and it takes wind or solar 1 to 3 years between planning and operation. So it basically took on the order of 15 years longer and about 8 times higher cost to build the Vogtle plant as it would have if they'd spent that same money on wind and solar. They would have, if they spent it on wind and solar, that energy from wind and solar would have been generating 15 years ago. And instead, there are 15 years of coal and gas emissions. So nuclear is not carbon free. There's a huge amount of emissions, not only associated with its construction, but also the time lag between planning and operation is so long that while you're waiting around for that new nuclear plant, you're emitting huge amounts of gas and coal emissions. And you have to count that. In addition, when you're running the reactor, you need to mine and refine uranium. Uranium refining is a very energy intensive process. It emits a lot of carbon and air pollution emissions. In addition, nuclear reactors, when they're running, they're emitting heat directly to the air, and they're evaporating water, a greenhouse gas, and both of those contribute to emissions. So a new nuclear reactor, its carbon equivalent emissions are 9 to 37 times that of wind. So it's not a carbon-free electricity source as claimed. Everybody claims, oh, it's zero carbon. It is not zero carbon. It is high carbon. It's not as high as gas or coal, but it's much higher than clean renewable electricity. But more importantly, it takes so long for between planning and operation of a new plant. It is entirely useless for solving the climate and pollution problems we face. We need to solve 80% of the climate problem and air pollution problems even faster by 2030 and 100% by 2035 to 2040. If you plan a new nuclear reactor today in 2024, it won't be ready till maybe 2042, 2043 or 4. That is way too late for it to help solve anything. Plus, it will cost so much more than if you put that money into wind or solar today that you would not get much benefit from it. Now, those are the kind of what I call the cost problems. Then the other problems, the energy security problems, of course, meltdown risk is 1.5% of all nuclear reactors ever built have melted down to some degree, which is a very high probability of meltdown. There's weapons proliferation risk. At least 5 countries of the world have secretly developed nuclear weapons under the guise of civilian nuclear energy programs or research reactor programs. There's underground uranium mining risk. About 10% of all underground uranium miners have died of lung cancer because of when you have underground uranium mining, you're exposed to polonium, which is a radioactive decay product of radon, which is in these uranium mines, and that contributes to lung cancer and additional deaths. Then there's the carbon dioxide emissions I spoke about, and then there's the radioactive waste issue. What do you do with all the waste that accumulates that you have to store for 200,000 years? Right now it's piling up in the United States, it's piling up near the reactors themselves. And so that is a long-term issue and a safety issue, of course, that also requires a lot of energy to maintain. So when you look at it, there's really no benefit whatsoever for any new nuclear reactors in the United States or worldwide today. They slow you down in terms of transitioning. They suck up money. They create all these risks that clean renewable energy does not. Well, what about small modular reactors? That's been the next new technology. Well, we used to try to develop small modular reactors before large reactors, but because of economies of scale, that's why we went up to large reactors, because they're supposed to be cheaper. So small reactors are not going to be any cheaper than large reactors. In fact, you need more material per unit electricity output compared with the large reactors. In addition, we're concerned about weapons proliferation, but now you have these reactors that can be moved around the world much easier. And so weapons proliferation goes up. You don't, if you try to solve one problem like reducing waste, you increase highly enriched uranium, so you increase weapons proliferation that way. In terms of time lag between planning and operation, it's similar to the large reactors. The proposal was that, well, by 2030, we might have a design. There was one company, NuScale, in the United States that had a reactor approved design by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but it lost its biggest bid to this consortium in Utah that was going to buy their reactor, but that consortium bailed out, said it's just way too expensive. The cost went up. It was delayed more. Now it's, the prototype won't even be available for that company or other companies until at least 2030, 2031, 2032. And that's just a prototype, and that's just a claim. There's no evidence. It won't just take longer and longer, but you have the same problems: high cost, delays, lots of promises, and no real benefit whatsoever, and lots of risk. And also, what about the existing nuclear, keeping these open? Because that's another argument, we should subsidize existing nuclear. Well, that is a problem too, because when that same money can go toward, right now, clean renewable energy, you're going to have to close those reactors eventually and spend a huge amount of money to replace them. So why are you spending an additional huge amount of money for subsidies plus a huge amount of money for replacing them when you have to just replace them anyway? Why not use that subsidy money just to replace them right now? Like in California, we have Diablo Canyon. It's hogging the major transmission line to the coast, preventing much larger amounts of offshore wind from being installed because there's not enough transmission. And it's taking a lot of money just to keep it open that could have been otherwise used to build wind and solar. In Michigan, the Palisades plant, the Department of Energy just gave them $1.5 billion, and there's promises for another $8 billion from different sources. That money could, it's only 800 megawatt plant. That money could easily just be replaced, the entire Palisades, with a lot of wind and solar and storage at get much more energy for the same amount of money. So it just makes no sense to keep these. In this case, they want to reopen that, so they have to refurbish it for a while, for several years, before it can even reopen. So we need to focus on what works. What works is clean renewable energy. Nuclear was from a past generation. It is not helpful in terms of going forward, in terms of solving our climate, air pollution, or energy security problems. It's really an opportunity cost that really delays such a solution. So anyway, with that, thank you very much. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Mark, for being here. And it's always good to have numbers to put to the lived experiences of the people who we have on this webinar, and those who were not able to be on this webinar, who are in the communities where there have been contamination events and exposure events. It really is important that we start to meld the two, because I am a firm believer that what we are feeling and what we are experiencing is in the science, that the science has for a very long time been captured by people who have an incentive to not share the robust science that actually supports what the lived experiences of the people in these communities have been. So with that, we can start questions and answers. I think what we need to do is have the panelists unmute themselves. I will go ahead and ask the first question, and there's been a lot of people asking specifically, what is happening with the blood draw in the film? Is the study ongoing? Do you have the results? Heidi, do you want to field that question? You're on mute, Heidi.
That is the question that we get after every film screening. So yes, I would like the answer too. And the scientists tell me we have to wait until the full study is completed. Beyond the 4 women that we drew blood from that you see in the film, we've gathered, I think, something like 40 more draws. And Aaron Datesman, who's listening but not on camera right now, he did most of the blood drawing with a phlebotomist. And so that's being looked at. We have a control group and it's in process. They're reading the thousands and thousands of slides, and the published piece should come out in 2025. So we'll have an answer then. But it's not like some people think that, oh, we're just getting blood draws. It's like a strep test. And we get yes for Beth and no for, it doesn't really work like that. So we don't even know, their names aren't anywhere on those tubes of vials. It's numbers and they're put away, and we don't know who has what, but we're trying to get a sense of the community. Were they harmed by this radiation or were they not? And did that radiation exposure damage their chromosomes or did it not? And we will know that pretty soon. They're not telling me though, because I have a big mouth. So they're going to make me wait.
All right. So thank you for that, Heidi. The next question I'm going to ask of both Joanne and Mark, and I'm going to contextualize it by saying that this weekend, Biden signed into law the Price-Anderson Act, which caps the liability should there be a case of a nuclear accident or catastrophe, a radioactive release. And I will preface that by saying that if you all pull out your insurance for your renter's insurance or your homeowner's insurance, the fact is that normal insurance companies will not insure you.
Right. Yes.
Against, they indemnify the nuclear industry, and you will not get a red cent for radiation from a private insurance industry or contamination or the like. So all of that is to say to Mark and Joanne, having prefaced it like that, do you feel that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has gotten better at regulating nuclear power reactors? Have there been any improvements since the 3 Mile Island catastrophe? What is your yeah, we'll have Beth and and Joyce weigh in on this question too. So there'll be 4 of you. Who wants to take it first?
Go ahead, Mark.
I'll just say that I've noticed more that there's a lot more political push from the Department of Energy for more nuclear subsidies, just more nuclear reactors, bills, and that's more worrisome. I think the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I can't really say that I can tell because I haven't been on the inside of that, but I think they are still concerned, hopefully, about safety, and so things haven't been faster than before. I mean, there's only been one reactor, the one set of reactors, Vogel, as I mentioned, in fact, in the last 20 years in the United States. So it's not like I think the problem is that nuclear is so expensive and it fails on its own before. And even with the NuScale reactor that was approved, that failed on its own as well. And just because it wasn't, just economically, it just doesn't work. So I don't know if it's an issue of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, even though a lot of people say that they might be more lax now. It's just that nuclear is so poor as a new technology It just needs subsidies. It needs to be pushed. It needs to be held up. But it's being pushed by those who have financial gain from it. So it's not being pushed by scientists, that's for sure.
I mean, I would just say that the NRC has long been criticized as having way too close a relationship with the nuclear industry. There's a revolving door in and out of that industry. People that, in my experience, although it's been a while, but I don't see that anything really has changed there, are too concerned about making sure the industry thrives rather than what their real, what their legal mandate is under the law is to protect the public and to make sure things are safe. The U.S. House of Representatives just passed with large bipartisan support the Atomic Energy Advancement Act, I think it's called, which not only would streamline whatever regulations currently exist in terms of licensing plants, the safety regulations. And I know firsthand what it's like to challenge a license. Even under the old rules, it's a nightmare. And it's a rigged kangaroo court process. There is no interest in hearing from opposing viewpoints. But not only that, in this bill, there is a provision that would restore the mission of the NRC to basically promote nuclear power. In the 1970s, Congress realized that the Atomic Energy Commission, which was the predecessor of the NRC and the Department of Energy in overseeing this technology, they realized back in the 70s that it was a conflict of interest for the NRC to have both the role as booster for the industry and regulating, overseeing, and protecting the public. So that's when they created the NRC, was to regulate. This new law, which hopefully won't get signed, but the House has passed it now, would get rid of that distinction and tell the NRC they have to start promoting nuclear power again. It's a shocking development. And I think something everybody needs to be concerned about that.
Yes. Well, may I say, as being someone who lives near a failed nuclear power plant, one of the reasons why Unit 1 closed down is because they could not sell their electricity. Yeah. So that tells you where they are economically. Okay. The bottom line on that is I've always said the NRC was like a man who had two horses, but only one ass to ride them both, promoting nuclear power and supervising it. So, there we have it in a nutshell.
And may I just say to Anna that 3 Mile Island is built on Indian burial grounds.
Ancient Indian burial grounds, yes. Yes. And Susquehanna in the native language here means sparkling water. For the yes. Rivers.
So we are connected on many levels, dear. Yes.
So the next question, speaking of Anna, is for her. Anna, I know that you mentioned a little bit about the uranium mine that they're just opening. I was wondering if you could unpack that for us just a little bit, how the Indigenous folks there feel about this. Are they organizing and getting involved, and what's happening in terms of this new mine, and what are the ways that we can plug in, again, looking back to the circle of warrior women that we can, and men, that we can plug in to help your community with I think it's the Pinyon mine that they just opened. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're doing exploratory mining, and that was in January. But right now, they're getting ready to do transport, and that's what Hall know. If you want to learn more about what's going on in terms of the community defense and activism, is hallknow.org. There's petitions there that you can also sign on to. They're asking the governor of Arizona to stop the route, and the Navajo Nation president is really not challenging the federal government and the license for them to go across Navajo land. We do have a radioactive waste ban, but it's not being honored because they're saying it's on state land. But the other one is, we all need to ask for more health studies. And what are some of the preventative measures that we can do upstream in terms of, there's a study going on now with some of our colleagues that work with the Navajo birth cohort study. They're looking at zinc as a way to perhaps, the question is, will it be able to remove some of the radionuclides from your blood system? So that's going on. So what are some solutions for us, and also doing our own community science, monitoring our own communities, our own homes. So those are some of the ways that we can be proactive through the rainbow of public health. This is really a public health issue, and citizens really have the opportunity to monitor ourselves in our communities.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important that the health aspects of this aren't left to the quote unquote government experts, because when you leave them to the government experts, people get poisoned. That's been the experience of so many of these communities around atomic facilities. I want to take a moment to do some housekeeping. I would like to say that we are going to go past 9:30. If any of the panelists can stay on past 9:30, we would appreciate it. There are more questions. If you can't, we also understand that. So please, just do what you need to. The other thing is that for the panelists, there are questions in the Q&A section that folks should try and take a look at that might be able to be answered by the various panelists. So thank you very much for that. And moving on to our next question. Krystal, do you feel your community continues to be poisoned, and are you frustrated with white communities in the United States that don't know about this or don't seem to care that the US government is not helping your people? So I suppose it sort of dovetails on what I just said, that it's difficult to rely on the United States government for things like this. I mean, especially since the government has supported nuclear industries from their inception.
Okay. All right. So in my community, a lot of our, I won't say all of them. Well, it's kind of hard to say. Our legislature and our New Mexico government and our Navajo Nation government are highly reliant on the fossil fuel industry economy, or the fossil fuel economies, that it's they see it as economic development, and they see like, oh, we're going to bring in, X amount of jobs and 500 plus jobs, and that's, what we've been told for so many years, like over 140 years, we've been told this, that these new waves of industry is going to provide a livelihood for our communities that are in, we don't have the luxury of just regular, everyday American society has, just due to, we still struggle with access to running water, clean water, and the lack of electricity. And so part of our organization, when we went through COVID and COVID happened, our first line grassroots organizers and our organization, my mother's organization, came together, and we recognize that we have current health disparities right now. There's a lot of immunocompromised folks already, and with the pandemic, it's going to really have a huge impact on our communities. And so the way that our government responded to our health crisis, just showed that they were not prepared, and they don't seem to have, we don't have the infrastructure. If there was another health crisis, even if there was another disaster, there isn't the infrastructure to respond quick enough. Emergency response, frontline response, and our politicians and our leaders, both sadly with our tribal government and our state government, continue to support these types of industries, and it's just really, really difficult to get our voices heard. Just with the dynamics of our community, like I said, the families, and then we have a lot of non-native leaders as well that control that narrative. And but you know, the fossil fuel industry is just one a monster that we're slaying. Other monsters, it would be like the alcohol industry. At one point in the 80s, 2020 did a huge story about our town, claiming it as Drunk Town USA. And Forbes magazine, I'm not too sure what the date, but they claimed Gallup as the most millionaires per capita. So our industry, our economy is, you know, very you know, just exploits our culture and our land and our women. Because another thing that we fight against is Gallup has one of the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous people. So it's a huge entity that we're dealing with, that when we rely, and we have leaders that continue to rely and push this narrative of fossil fuel and clean energy, and say that once you get this job, you're going to have all these lavish vehicles, and, you know, really sell this type of lifestyle to our communities. It's really hard for our community members to say no when we don't have vehicles. You know, we're sharing vehicles just to get to Gallup. You know, Gallup's a really big point, major point of, I guess, just getting necessities for our communities. It's a lot of our population relies on public assistance programs. So just in Gallup, it's a border town of the reservation. In Gallup, it's about 20,000, 30,000 people. And on the first weekend of every month, because we rely on public assistance, that population triples to maybe 80,000 people go to Gallup to get their basic necessities, to go to the hospital, to get food for their animals, and for, you know, to get medicine, to get water, because they haul water, to get wood, to get, some people still burn coal, so they get coal. So it's a whole mechanism that in my community, you know, it's really hard to break that. It's really hard to break that cycle and expose the narrative. But just with my experience, it's, you know, it's going to take multi-generations for us to continue this narrative and to continue to tell the next generation the truth of what's really happening in communities. Because whatever happens in New Mexico will eventually happen in someone else's backyard, any place in the world, because we're a guinea pig, you know, society, colonial society in New Mexico. We're that guinea pig. We're that national sacrifice zone for the U.S. So I hope that answers the question, because it's really hard to, like, you know, but we're really having with this next wave of new leaders and community members, we're waking up and we're seeing how all of it's aligned with reproductive justice, with worker rights, with the healthcare system, with agricultural rights, water rights. We need everybody involved in this fight against this entity of fossil fuel.
Thank you, Krystal, for sharing your experiences. I am going to ask the next question to Mary. So Mary, since you've been working on the disproportionate impacts of radiation on females, adult females, and female children, what has been the response from what I perceive as the largely male regulatory agencies and researchers? If you could share your experience. And then if any of the other ladies on the panel would like to follow up with personal experiences and if they might have changed over the decades, that would be interesting.
So forgive me for taking a slightly lighthearted answer in making a profile. We now have this way to kind of do this in a tongue-in-cheek way. So I'll talk about the Barbies first, and then I'll talk about the Kens. Hi, Barbie. I don't know how many people here saw the movie, but it's a potent thing, this Barbie film, and it gives us a way to start talking with a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek about the differences in our society between males and females without necessarily calling out, pejorative terms. And there is a huge difference in the way in which I see people who are also female, like me, respond, how I see people who identify as non-binary respond, and how I see people who are males respond. So the Barbies, like I said, the first thing that happens, I can see they're doing an inventory of how many mammograms have I had? When was the last time I let my daughter have an x-ray? Did any of my kids have CT scans when they were kids? How often do we fly in high altitude planes if they happen to know that there's less atmosphere, that's less shielding from the atmosphere and radiation from space? So there's this whole inventory I see a woman going through when she finds out this news that radiation is different for her. She takes it very personally. Barbies get it. Hi, Ken. Ken, you listen and very often have good questions. Most of my Kens who are close to me do not dismiss this information at all. However, it's a factoid. It's one more in their basket of things that they might bring up at some point, but they move on, and they move on very quickly. And quite frankly, there's a whole branch of my colleagues who work on nuclear weapons who told me to be quiet because radiation doesn't matter, because the blast and the fireball and all the terrible, horrible outcomes of using nuclear weapons, we're all back in that place of being really very worried about this. And I get it. But I want to brag for a moment because those Kens didn't understand that there was a strategic move going on in the global community to move nuclear weapons into humanitarian law, where biological and chemical weapons have been banned. Landmines, water mines have been banned under humanitarian law and accords that intersect with that because of their impacts of denying us of our human rights that are universal under the founding of the United Nations, and which indigenous peoples have known forevermore, the connections to water and land and air and our food and each other and all those things. So the disproportionate impact of radiation on girls and women is fundamental to the template for being able to take nuclear weapons into the General Assembly instead of only the Security Council at the UN, and the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which I would be totally unhappy if we didn't mention in an event that I'm part of, because this new treaty has come into force as of 2021. And certainly it's about many, many things besides radiological differences. But if you look at the preamble, the whole treaty is very short. And in the preamble, you'll see the disproportionate impact of radiation to girls and women as a result of exposure to ionizing radiation in the fourth line. And I'll stop now just by bragging one step further. Hey, Barbies, in the first time that there was a draft of the treaty, we were in the second line. So, hey, fourth line, second line, I'm not going to complain to the people who finalized the text, but yeah, we were in the second line. So we must rise. We must take this seriously, and we must spread it out, and we must lead the world away from these death technologies, because honestly, the Kens, well, they've been trying, but have they succeeded?
No.
Thank you, Mary. So I don't know if Beth or Joyce or Joanne would like to weigh in on how their interactions in the 70s and then later on might have or might not have changed, but I'm curious what they found and how they handled sort of the maleness of the world of 3 Mile Island.
Do you want to go first?
Well, I think one of the most disarming things about it was that we were women. We were the average Jane out there and had no prior knowledge to the real technology of nuclear power, only that it could be potentially dangerous. And I remember going to one of my first meetings and a senator saying to me, if you'd only go home and bake your cookies, we'll take care of this. This is a very complicated problem, and we'll take care of this. And I said to him, sir, I was home baking cookies when you had your problem. So now I'm here because you couldn't take care of your problem. So that's how it's evolved for us.
Yes. And when we would go to testify in different in front of organizations in Washington, it was always like 12 men in blue suits. There was never a woman on the panel. There was never any availability of a connection of any kind. And there was a condescending attitude always when we would speak or try to speak. And it was just very disheartening. And Joyce's kitchen was like our strategy room, which is where we are today. And we would have all this planned out, our questions and everything. And we'd go down to Lake Barrett every Thursday at 10 o'clock to meet with him. He was a representative at the NRC. And he would be just as condescending as all hell. He just would not give us an inch, would he?
No. Really. And you know what's so wonderful about we as women? We are persistent.
Oh, yes.
We are persistent. Yes. And I would say that is probably the uniting factor for all women that are on this panel tonight.
Yes.
Our persistence will really prevail ultimately, ladies.
Yes, definitely. We endure. We endure. If you can go through childbirth, you can endure anything. Is that not the truth in a sense? And if you didn't have the privilege to do that, then you know someone that did and you stand by them.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I remember saying, you can say whatever you want, but we're not going to go away.
No.
And we didn't, and we still haven't.
No.
Joanne.
Go ahead, Joanne.
I mean, here was Louise and I up against
yes,
an entirely male licensing board, appeals board, and NRC 5 commissioners. Not only that, we were in the hearings up against the company, and the NRC staff were on the same side against us. Every single person was a male. The judges, that once we got into court, they were all men. I mean, there were no women at all in I think in the entire, maybe there was one, but out of hundreds of men, the NRC staff that we would have to deal with, aside from the hearings, were all men. I don't know what it's like now. I'm hoping it's better, at least on that score. But I mean, we were so outgunned at every level that the maleness of it didn't even register to me.
You're right.
We were being gaslit by everybody. We were in a proceeding that was completely rigged against us. We were not nuclear physicists. We had to learn everything quickly on our own just to keep in the hearing, because if we were to make one little procedural mistake, they were dying to kick us out.
Yes.
So we couldn't make a mistake. We had to get everything in on time. I remember driving down to Washington in a blizzard just to file an appeal that was due at a certain point, having been up for 2 nights straight. There was, it was so unfair. And to us, I think that's really what we were dealing with. We couldn't even see who these people are or what gender they were.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just the unfairness of it was so overwhelming. I don't think it's changed.
I just want to add, because since I know you all so well, I mean, Joanne, you worked for 5.5 years around the clock, like you said, no sleep, for nothing. You were not being paid.
A little bit. I was being paid a little bit.
I'm sure it wasn't very much.
No.
You were sleeping in other people's places. You were, driving all over the place. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. It was hard. The thing is that, we would go through periods of that where it was 24 hours a day. And then we would wait. We would have to wait. So there were periods of time where I would try to do other things, but, I'd always have to come back and always be on call for the latest thing that we were required to file. And sometimes it would come out of nowhere. So, it was stressful. What can I say?
Yeah.
And also, I don't think people realize, Beth and Joyce and Linda and Paula were mothers with multiple children.
Yeah.
And their husbands had jobs and they had other things they were doing. And they took a lot of years away from their families to do this. Again, they were not paid and they did not have a lot of money at home to hire nannies or whatever. So a lot of time was given and sacrificed that I think kind of gets ignored sometimes when we think of activists. They're just crazy people who run around, and they're people who are solid citizens giving up their lives to protect families and communities.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We were really lucky, the 4 of us, in the fact that we had 4 good husbands who really worked with us and took up the laundry and the food shop and then the dusting and the cleaning and all that. And we've been together a long time, so that did help us to stay strong and not think, oh, where am I at and should I be doing this, because they were there to help us get over those bridges when we were really having bad days, and there were many bad days. There were many bad days.
As Joanne attested to, it's such insanity to begin with, how you had to fight them, on a shoestring when they had everything in their power and their control. And then if you did win something, they would change the rules.
Yes.
The rules would change, and then you'd have to do something else to accommodate them, to beat the facade of that they were there to help you.
Changing the rules was exactly why 3 Mile Island reopened.
Yeah.
They had rules about what they would not do. They would only reopen the plant after hearings were finished on every issue that had to be brought up. And, we kept winning on these issues. So they kept accumulating and accumulating. And then at the last minute, they decided to change the rules to ignore all evidence of misconduct and compromised management integrity, separate all of that evidence. And I had filed a 450-page petition at one point with all of it, separate all of it out and decide to restart the plant without considering any of it, which was a huge change in the rules that they had set up. And that was the basis for our appeal into the courts, that we were basically saying they violated their own rules by knocking out all of this evidence and stopping the hearings in the middle. And, I thought we had a good argument, we got one judge at the appellate court level to agree with us, and we got Justice Brennan in the Supreme Court to agree with us, but ultimately we all got reversed and the plant started.
Yeah.
And Mary, you wanted to pipe in here, but I'll say one thing, moderator's prerogative. They're doing the same kind of thing. In Japan, after Fukushima, they raised the amount of allowable radioactivity that one could be exposed to from 1 millisievert to 20 millisieverts. Now, you don't need to know what a millisievert is for this, but all you need to know is that they decided that after that catastrophe, 20 times what they said was okay before was just fine. Thank you very much. And that's nonsense. And they change the rules, like that's just one example, all the time. Mary.
Yes. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a reflection on change over time. I was hired to live and work in Washington, D.C. in 1991, and I would go to meetings of federal radiation related stuff, less about the technology, more about, the radiation regulation. I was most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the only woman in the room, or maybe I was in the same meeting where 2 or 3 women I knew were also there. Over time, there became something called Women in Nuclear, promoted by the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is the lobby organization for the industry. And I really feel kind of guilty because it feels, and I'm sure this is me over personalizing it, but it feels to me like I was such a break in the groupthink that they felt that their public relations narrative needed women to be representing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, et cetera. And so they started bringing women in, and then that made the nuclear industry start bringing women in. So like the first 3 years, I was the only person in the bathroom on a break. But about 3 years in, 3-4 years in, there began to be other women in the bathroom. And I feel guilty about this because none of those women should be in exposure situations. And I just pray that my willingness to step up and step in didn't result in this change. I think I'm overstating it, and it probably was coming anyway, but literally no women to now. There's really quite a few. So if you go out to these meetings today, you'll find moderators for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. You'll find women who are sitting on the judge panels of the Atomic Safety Licensing Board. You'll find a few heads of divisions in the NRC who are women. So there is a change.
Well, what we found out, another thing that the company did when we started going to meetings and complaining, is they started hiring women as their PR people.
Mhm.
They had none on staff. So they hired 2 PR women to be present when we were present, so that they had women there.
Oh, they came after me.
Yeah.
Lisa was one of their names. She would attack me in the press.
Mm-hmm.
She was lovely.
Yes, yes.
They all took the nasty pill. They all took the same pill at breakfast, they swear.
Yeah.
So thank you all for this wonderful conversation. This will be our final question open for discussion. How do any of you feel, and I guess I want Heidi to start this off, how do you feel like this film can help address the dangers and health issues that we learn about in radioactive and that we've heard about tonight from our various speakers? So Heidi, if you want to start off that discussion. So I guess this is the role of film and connection with people's lived experiences and stories to moving us forward to a greater understanding of how they are impacted.
Thanks, Cindy. So I personally think film and art and music and other creative forms are really important to messaging. And there are some people who need to read academic articles. There are many people who won't touch them. They read them, they fall asleep. I think the human story is the story that touches hearts and moves us and we can relate to personally. Again, some people want to see the charts. They want to see the pie charts. They want to see how the plant was built and how it where the valve was and where the leaks were and how it happened minute by minute. But there's something incredible about hearing the human, meeting the actual people. And, not everyone's going to drive down to 3 Mile Island and spend 5 years hunting people down and knocking on doors. What the film allows you to see in 77 minutes, and other films, not just this one, is to really feel like you're there and you're living it and you're in the shoes of the human beings who have experienced this and are still living it. And I think that's really powerful. Some people learn history through a novel. Some people read it in a history book with a bunch of facts. I found with this particular story, there's a very different narrative from the human beings who lived it than any history book I read about 3 Mile Island. You just didn't get this story. You didn't know what it was like for the human beings who lived it. And it isn't just a machine that operates and then maybe there's some leaks. They're people who live around there. They're human beings. They're families, just like everybody else. And I really feel like art has the capacity to reach far, far distances and into many generations. We read novels from hundreds of years ago, and we learn about the human experience from that time, and it speaks to us. And I feel like this particular story is profoundly human. And I've spent much time at different nuclear sites with different women's groups and activists and men and women and talking to lawyers and scientists. And this experience is so similar. It's not just, it's micro, it's got the micro story of these individuals, but it's also macro. It's repeated. Of course, it's different, the type of radiation, the location, people with different races, different colors, different issues in each situation. But there's a fundamental piece here, and it's the human story. It's, it's David and Goliath. And
Yes.
touches the heart. And that's what I wanted to do. I could write a book recounting the facts and the figures, and I don't think that's what people remember. Most people. There are people some people do, but I think in terms of making change, when we feel it inside, that's when we take action. That's when we kind of wake up and say, I have to do something, or I have to learn more about this. It's not just an abstract notion somewhere out there, some mathematical formula. Leaky valve somehow doesn't really move me. The way, sitting in your kitchen with you all and meeting your kids and hearing your stories. You could tell me about leaky valves here to Kingdom Come, and that's in everything. The valve was stuck open, that's what happened. Okay. It doesn't have that piece that grabs us and makes us care, because we really should care. Every tragedy, and there's so many right now we're dealing with, when you see the children, you see the suffering people, you hear it, then we care, then we think, we got to do something. We have to do something.
Can I just say something? When you were talking, Heidi, about the leaky valves and the mechanics of everything that went wrong, I think that's what you did with the documentary, was make it all fit like a puzzle. Like Joanne talking about the leaky valves, and like this machine not working and the whistleblower, and it was all pieced together like a perfect puzzle so that people could get a complete story, a complete side of a story there. Where I think if you hadn't done the documentary, it still would be piecemeal and people still would not understand the whole concept of it. They still don't, even after the documentary. Sometimes they choose in this area to believe that it's there, but it's not there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's like living with the giant. But you know what? I think the most important thing we all learned in this fighting this entity was you have power. Do not ever, ever, ever give up your power or or the belief that you can do something, because we all can. You know, terrible things happen when a few good men do nothing.
Mhm.
And that, more importantly, when women do nothing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I have no regrets.
No, I don't.
No
I
regrets.
don't either.
Yeah.
When we were talking about doing this, and you realize in the documentary, there was no costume designer, there was no makeup, there was nothing. We were raw moms.
Yeah.
At the truest sense of the imagination, we were raw moms. And I remember talking to Simeon one day, and I said, Simeon, you promised that I'd be 30 pounds thinner and no wrinkles. And he goes to me, Beth. And I says, you lied, Simeon. And he goes, Beth, it's the character that you built because of your journey.
Yeah.
And it took it all away.
Yes.
Every wrinkle is every time I had to deal with one of those people who told me I wasn't worth anything.
Yeah.
And I proved them wrong.
We worked very hard for these.
Yeah, we did. We did. We really did.
And you really worked very hard in the film. Sweaty summer days, waiting outside, coming in. It was not always easy.
No.
So many funny moments.
So Joanne was unmuted first, and then Mary, and I'm going to ask them both to be brief because we are at 9:59, and then Heidi and I have some concluding remarks. So Joanne first, and then Mary.
Concluding remark? Or what?
Well, whatever, you were going to say something, I thought, on top of what was going on in this discussion. Oh, you were just unmuted? Okay.
Yeah.
Mary?
I just want to express my appreciation for being part of this discussion tonight and to be with all of you, and how important this film is. I believe it is a huge contribution to people understanding better. And I want to bring out one little piece. Many people want to know what happened with the blood test, and there'll be a paper, they'll find out about that eventually. But I think it's genius, absolute genius, that the audience is in some little teeny tiny way into the boat, that those of us who know we've been impacted by a radiation accident, mine was at work in 1984. Once you know you've been impacted, you don't know if you're going to have any health consequences from it. You don't know what's going to happen to the people you love. You don't know whether there's going to be any resolution or reparation, or, we're all working for those things, but we don't know. We're doing it on faith. And in terms of our bodies, we live every day with that uncertainty.
Yes.
And so I love that Heidi figured out how to get the audience into that boat with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all want to know, what's the outcome? Well, guess what, guys? That's the thing about radiation, right?
Yeah.
So genius film, Heidi. Thank you so much.
Well, a lot of people, thank you. A lot of people are involved. And speaking of Simeon, he was our editor and he's fantastic. I want to say one thing that I heard last night, which was mind blowing. We just screened in Cape Cod, and after the film, there was a couple there and they raised their hand and they said, we lived within the 5-mile radius of the power plant at the time of the meltdown. And they lived in the community, and they said 1 year after the meltdown, they had a baby that did not live. And they said, do you think it could have anything to do with this? And I said, well, McLeod, who was later fired, he looked at the statistics, and there was a doubling of infant mortality a year after the meltdown. And they still look, they look 45 years later, they're brokenhearted. Is it because of radiation? We'll never know. As Mary says, we may know a lot more after the study's done, but we need more studies. We need more studies, right? So it's just, that I couldn't believe this couple was sitting there who said we live within the 5-mile radius. I was like, I know that term, that's where you all live. Okay, so I know we do have to finish up, and we have some closing remarks.
And I just have to say, these are my closing remarks. Oh my goodness, what a marvelous, marvelous panel. To Mark, who had to go, he was marvelous. All of you ladies are just amazing, amazing in what you do. Thank you so much for being in this work. And we need each and every one of you, and we need to keep the circle connection going. So with that, thank you to the people who attended this webinar. Thank you so much for your thought-provoking questions. And I will hand it over to Heidi for final concluding remarks.
Thank you, Cindy, so much. I have a couple of big thank yous to Mike Carberry and to Sierra Club, who hosted our film as their inaugural film for their Nuclear Free Film Festival. And that's partly how this all came together. And Mike for setting up our Zooms and helping us get this piece put together. Cindy, who has been incredible in organizing the webinar, which seems like it might be easy. Here we are. No, it's not easy. And Cindy has been a real trooper and really, really helpful. And I'm so thankful to you and to everything you've done to support the film, to support my work. It's just unbelievable. Years and years and years of incredible friendship and work. And you're just an outstanding human being. And I love your writing. Everyone should go read her publications. They're extraordinary. And her knowledge on radiation and health is vast. So go read Cindy's articles, and we'll also publish them for you to see. I also just want to thank all of our sponsors. We have many, many groups who have supported this event, supported our film, and too many to list right now. We'd be sitting here all night long with me reading them. But what I am going to follow up this webinar with, I don't know who's left with us, but I will do a mailing following up with sort of basic information, what people can do, kind of an impact letter. And it will include all of our sponsors and co-sponsors with links and actions and how to get in contact with them. And if you want to be involved in your communities, where to go, and also list some of the articles that were posted in books that we recommend. That will also be on my website, radioactivethefilm.com. There'll be an impact page, which I have to put together. And that will sort of lead people. You're interested in this topic, go here, talk to this group or this person. And finally, you can watch Radioactive, the film, Radioactive, The Women of 3 Mile Island on Amazon Prime Video and also on Apple TV, and stay in contact. We are all available to come to you, talk to you, come to your communities, give these talks. So spread the word. This is I made the film. We made the film as a tool to educate. It is not meant to just sit on the shelf, and certainly isn't Barbie or Oppenheimer and going to the Oscars, or unfortunately, wouldn't that be nice? But it was not intended for that purpose. It's intended to reach a very large audience and to educate and motivate and inspire people to take action on this issue. And I hope people will, and reach out for support if they need it. And so thank you. Thank you to everyone here. It's bittersweet 6 years later to be kind of closing the circle.
Yeah.
We first landed there on the 39th anniversary, literally. And here we are, and let's keep it on. There's so many women around in all these different communities who need this support, need this work. And I see many of them on here writing things. So thank you. And thank you to all the people working to protect our planet and the people and living beings in it. Thank you.
Okay, we're out. Good night. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Good.
Good night. Thank you.